The current budget outlook for the state of Washington gets worse and worse and worse as the months go by. And we already know Democrats are floating a potential income tax or other revenue streams in January. So how exactly will they make all this work legally? This segment is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to do just that. So revisiting quickly what put us in this budgetary crisis we're in. So we obviously already had a pretty profound budget crisis earlier this year that they had to make up for with $9 to $12 billion in new taxes when you combine state and local taxes, more around $12 billion. But now, heading into the 2026 legislative session, the revenue forecast gets worse and worse, and so they're gearing up for more taxes. This was from the Office of Financial Management. Projected state revenue through 2029 down by $66 million just from the September forecast. So every time they're looking at these numbers, forecasting revenue that's coming in, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And they said there were two primary reasons for the changes in the forecast. They're seeing lower than projected revenue coming in from housing permits and lower than projected revenue coming in from simple employment. Okay, what's going on with employment? Well, businesses are closing down. Businesses, some are leaving the state, some are just closing their doors. Because why? The tax burden has become too high, especially after the latest round of tax increases. We've done story after story after story after story on restaurants, as an example, closing their businesses, some of them in the area where Amazon operates in the city of Seattle. What happened with Amazon? Well, Amazon took 10,000 plus jobs and moved them out of the city over what? The tax climate. So what did I always say? You can attack big business, but if you attack big business, you attack all the businesses that rely on big business. And so it's just all around a big cluster F. And they should have known that they were getting themselves into this situation. Like the housing permits. They literally were warned. If you pass all these new taxes, if you pass rent control, people who have capital, who are going to develop, build homes, whatever it is, they're not going to do it here. They were literally told that. A guy from Waugh Realtors sat in front of them during a committee meeting and said, people will take their money elsewhere if you pass rent control. They passed rent control and now they're, oh my God, revenue, it's down. Who could have guessed this? It's crazy. Yeah, they knew what was going to happen and they're just looking for an excuse to pass an income tax. So now maybe they have it. This was the story on October 30th that was put out by the State Standard, the first glimmer or glimpse we had of something like this happening. Washington state Democrats look at imposing an income tax on high earners. The idea is brewing ahead of the 2026 session. It would target those making above $1 million. So right now, Washington is one of 9 states that does not tax wages specifically. But as you know, we have in our state constitution a prohibition on any sort of graduated income tax. So that means you can't treat different brackets differently if you want to pass an income tax here. So this obviously does just that. It singles out people who make over $1 million a year, and it says, we're just going to tax you. So blatantly, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I don't think you have to be to understand that that is unconstitutional. So why do Democrats believe they can do it? That's the really important question. Joining us today to talk about why Democrats might believe they can do it is Senate Minority Leader John Braun. Gee, if only someone had warned them that some of their housing policy might lead to lower projections of housing permits. Weird.
Yeah, I mean, they've been claiming to do work on housing policy, but they're really just working on the margins, not willing to dive into the really hard problems, Growth Management Act in particular. And they're shocked that housing starts are down when we're in the middle of a housing crisis. So not only are we not building the houses that our folks need here in Washington, it's starting to materially impact the state's budget because it's an important part of our economy.
Well, and we played on the show a clip from a realtor who said during the rent control debate, if you pass this, developers and builders they're going to take that capital, they're going to move it somewhere else. And that's right. Exactly what they're doing. So, that's obviously a significant portion of the money that comes into our state coffers, as is, employment and business. And now we see some businesses leaving the state. We keep seeing headlines like every single day. So do you see either of those two revenue streams improving anytime soon?
No. I mean, this is all the culmination of this tax-first policy the Democrats have used to address their budget issues over the last few years, is that if there's a problem to be solved. They think a new tax will solve it. And the reality is those taxes are having a real impact on our business climate in many sectors. Everything we're hearing right now is that they want to come back and raise more taxes to fix this problem. And now, surprise, because of the ever increasing taxes, our revenue base is starting to go down. So this is a big, big problem. And their approach seems to be, we'll fix it with new taxes. And we know that's not going to work. It hasn't worked before, and it's not going to work now.
Well, and you make a good point about new taxes in addition to the largest tax increase in state history. So where do they go find that revenue? Because they already pushed through, some estimates put it higher than like more like 12 billion. So let's say $9 to $12 billion in new taxes and fees. So, I mean, didn't they squeeze everything they could squeeze out of us already this year? I mean, where are they going to find that money?
Yeah, and the difference in that range is whether you include state, local taxes or not. It's about 9.5 in state and the rest in local taxes. But it's a big number, an order of magnitude larger than any number in the past. And what the rumor mill is, and it's always ramping up here in the last few months before session, is they want to go back and talk about the wealth tax, which we know doesn't work from experience around the world. They want to go back and talk about, the state version of the Jumpstart tax in Seattle, which, saw the relocation of 50,000 jobs from Seattle to across the lake to Bellevue or other places in the country. And now they're just being candid. I mean, they're talking about just going ahead and putting in place a real income tax, in spite of the fact that they just voted on a citizen initiative legislature last year to make it, to forbid an income tax. Now they're showing their true colors, and they want to come back, and they think based on the ruling from the capital gains income tax that they can, in spite of the fact that the Constitution says we can't tax property over 1%, it has to be uniform. They're saying, well, an income tax isn't really about it's about the transaction when you get your paycheck, and therefore an excise tax, and we can therefore have an income tax. And they feel, I think, confident that the very liberal state Supreme Court will back them up on that. So these are the things that I'm hearing about, all of them enormous taxes. I mean, we're talking, even a couple of those will outsize the tax increase from this year. It's insane. And businesses and people are leaving the state in droves, and they're taking their ability to create an economy, build wealth for our state with them. And we're going to be hurting if this keeps up.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point there, is even though they pushed through this massive tax package, there were some taxes that even just a couple months ago were too controversial for them to push through, like the wealth tax, like expanding Seattle's failed tax on high-paying jobs. So it's like, well, now we're at the bottom of the barrel, and a year later, they'll revisit those things that were too controversial just a couple months ago. The income tax thing is interesting. So what they're planning to do, allegedly, is target those making above $1 million. First of all, I don't know if you can answer this. Do you believe they would even propose it if they weren't confident the state Supreme Court would back them on it? Do you believe there are conversations that happen behind the scenes?
Well, I can't attest to any conversations. I certainly wouldn't be surprised. But if you read the ruling from the capital gains income tax, the ruling from the state Supreme Court, it makes a very clear, bright line between property and the transaction for property. And it seems to me, and I'm not a lawyer, but I talk to lots of lawyers, it seems to me that sets them up to come back and throw out the nearly 100-year-old precedent that says our state's constitution prohibits a graduated income tax. So I think they're set up to do this. And I want to be clear, when I first saw it, I mean, I thought it was a bad idea, but it seemed like it was primarily targeting tech and maybe healthcare, where you have very high salaries. And I haven't seen a bill. Nobody's put out a bill yet, but as I hear additional information, this is much worse than that, if you can imagine. This is going after what they call adjusted gross income on your income tax statement. So all the folks I mentioned before, but also any S corp or LLC, any earnings you have from an S corp goes to the owner's adjusted gross income. Mm-hmm. Even in many cases, they don't actually see that money. It's money that the business may make, but they would retain to cover, capital investments, to cover working capital. So it's pretty common in an LLC or S corp to see none or even a fraction of your adjusted gross income, and yet they're going to add a 10% tax on this. And they have no idea how complicated this is for companies that do business in different states and how it interacts with income taxes in other states. This is a big, big deal. Even if you like the proposal, which I definitely do not, it's enormously hard to put in place. But they are, from what I'm hearing, they're undeterred by the will of people or the complications of the tax code or what it does to our business economy. They're just thumbing their nose at any results, and they're going to press onward.
Yeah. Bob Ferguson said this of the rumors of some sort of income tax. He said, "We did raise billions of dollars in revenue earlier this year, and I'm skeptical of additional revenue at this time." Do you believe that he's skeptical of additional revenue?
I suppose I'd give him the benefit of the doubt, but I seem to remember him being skeptical of additional revenue earlier this year before at the beginning of the session, and then still signing, nearly $13 billion in new taxes, state and local.
Yeah.
So his skepticism doesn't seem to hold for much when it comes right down to it.
Yeah, I've long since stopped giving him the benefit of the doubt on these things. And, that seems to be their solution, is not cutting. And I think what they'll probably say is we cut everything we could cut last year and there's just nowhere left to cut. So from your perspective, does your party have any power or authority to be able to stop any of it?
Well, we are in a minority, but we have the power to present and promote better ideas. And that's what we've done. In the last session, we promoted we created a full budget, and that's a big deal. It takes weeks and weeks, lots of time. In the end, it's like 3 inches thick, but it was called the Save Washington budget. And it maintained the essential services. It took care of our vulnerable citizens. It did everything we need to keep operating the state effectively, and it did it without any taxes. Now, some of those ideas we used in that budget to keep our spending under control, those ships have sailed, and we can't necessarily go back. But there's still a lot of ideas in that budget that will allow us to reduce our expenses, or what I like to say, bend the cost curve inside the budget over time. And that makes a big difference. I mean, you can still do something, you can still deliver services, but you got to find ways to keep your costs down, just like any household or business budget would do. We haven't been doing that. I said the Democratic majority hasn't been doing that at the state level, and we need to do it much more aggressively.
It seems like they're gearing up to blame President Trump for the inevitable further increases in taxes. We saw an op-ed written by House Speaker Lori Jenkins, who said Trump is going to make life miserable for Washingtonians' pocketbooks, which is just insane. But that seems to be sort of the scapegoat for them, is President Trump, President Trump, President Trump. And I know you've had some nuanced opinions on the president. It's not really about him personally, but I mean, is there any truth to that? Is there any truth to, aspects of federal dollars President Trump is withholding that do put us in a difficult budget situation?
No, I don't think so. I think in that regard, President Trump is getting blamed for something he doesn't cause. I think the closest argument you could make is this is a trade-dependent state, and tariffs do have an impact on us. But if you actually look at the impact, it's relatively small compared to the impact of very specific policies put in place by the state, Democrats in the state legislature. New taxes, new regulation, new labor costs, all these things that they put in place are driving up expenses. Even if they want to talk about, the HR 1, the big beautiful bill, which I would disagree on their assessment there. But even if they want to talk about that, doesn't go into effect until the end of next year. This whole idea that it's what's affect, the challenges we see in healthcare in particular are caused by that. It's just dishonest, frankly. It's hiding the fact that they took hundreds of millions of dollars out of our healthcare system through their very own decisions inside the budget.
Yeah. I figured that was the case, but I had to ask anyway. They really do get away with blaming a lot of things on President Trump, though. I mean, it's such a great distraction from the issues that the state is facing. All right, Senator John Braun, we appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and of course, State Senator Braun also running for Congress against Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez down in the 3rd District. We were going to have him on to talk about that race, but honestly, one of the biggest things facing people across the state, including in the 3rd, is what's happening with the taxation situation, the unaffordability, and so we kind of focused on that. We'll have him back on to talk about the congressional race, maybe in the new year. That segment was brought to you in partnership with our friends at Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org. Make sure you sign up for their newsletter to be alerted to opportunities to do just that. Again, future42.org.